After waking up in a cold sweat due to realizing Gravity Rush will never get a third game, I attempt to numb my sorrows the only way a man knows how to, desperately checking the under $5 section on Steam. With my eyes peeled for any good deals, I scroll past hundreds of hentai games that prove Steam has wonderful quality control, and after countless hours, a little game called Fighting EX Layer popped up. Oh yeah, I remember hearing about this game ages ago, I think to myself. The Street Fighter EX games are awesome, and as EX Layer is made by the same studio, it should be pretty cool. Plus, the game is only $1.50, which is a wicked deal. So, I punch in my card information, buy the game, wait 7 years for it to download because of Australian internet, and I finally start playing. So once I begin messing around in training mode, it hits me. I can make a video about Fighting EX Layer. Yep, despite being out for centuries, I've never touched Fighting EX Layer before, but I've heard that it's great. As I'm not too familiar with the game's backstory, I thought that this generous Steam discount provided the perfect opportunity for me to learn. It's been a while since I covered one of these Street Fighter EX games on the channel, and although this game is more of its own thing, I don't see many people talking about it anymore. This is quite the shame, as Fighting EX Layer is a truly fascinating game, and I would go as far as to label it one of the most interesting fighting games of the 2010s. Now that the stage is set, get ready to rip out a super cancel as we explore the world of Fighting EX Layer. After tearing it up in the late 90s with their first two Street Fighter EX games, development studio Arika had formed quite the relationship with Capcom, as they were clearly comfortable with letting Arika run wild with their IP. In a better universe, Street Fighter EX would have kept going until the end of time, but in reality, Street Fighter EX3 released to a mixed critical reception. Along with the series' overall declining sales figures throughout the early 2000s, this persuaded Capcom to no longer commission their old friend for more spin-off titles, so Arika went back to making games outside of the fighting game genre. After keeping busy with this endeavor for around a decade, Nintendo partnered with Arika and tasked them with creating software for the then brand new 3DS. If you've ever played the system's built-in AR games or any of its NES digital re-releases, well, they were developed by Arika. Because the studio had a massive head start with understanding the 3DS's hardware capabilities, they developed an internal test project that seemed to take some inspiration from the Street Fighter EX series. Silicon Era reported as such on June 30th, 2011, and there are even some surviving images scattered around the internet. Recognizable fighters include Kairi, Blair, Doctrine Dark, Shadowgeist, and more, but the most die-hard of fans will notice a lack of Skullomania. Poor guy. As there are no Street Fighter characters to be found, it seems as though Arika based this demo on 1998's Fighting Layer, which was essentially Street Fighter EX but with just the Arika fighters. Also, remember how I stated that this test project was developed for the 3DS? Well, that's what everybody believed for months, but on the 1st of July that same year, Arika president Ichiro Mihara explained that the demo was actually made for smartphones, and that it would have looked much prettier if it were running on Nintendo's handheld. After such a devastating blow was dealt to the fanbase, it seemed like all hope was lost, but in early 2017, something peculiar happened. With no prior announcements or rumors, Arika uploaded a teaser trailer for what appeared to be a new Street Fighter EX title, and even though it looked quite good, fans soon noticed that it was published on April Fool's Day. To say that there was mass confusion would be an understatement, as nobody quite knew how to make sense of it. Arika isn't the biggest company in the world, just to put things nicely, so it would have cost a decent chunk of money to create this, but maybe that was the point, to convince people that this game was real for the elaborate April Fool's joke. In a detailed article published by Polygon, Arika Nishitani, one of the designers behind Final Fight and Street Fighter II, revealed that after founding Arika and developing games for decades, the company wanted to effectively utilize Unreal Engine 4 going forward, and they made this prototype as a way to understand the engine's minutiae. Once the trailer went out and fan reception was positive, Arika decided to officially turn this into an actual real game. This was only possible because of how the Street Fighter EX series was initially negotiated, however, as when the first EX title was being pitched, Nishitani requested that Capcom not take ownership of any characters that his new company would create. As Nishitani had prior connections with Yoshiki Okamoto, the man who gave the series the green light, he agreed, and that's how Arika fully owned the rights to all of their colourful characters. If this wasn't the case, then I don't believe that the series would have existed at all, which is quite the scary thought. Thankfully, Nishitani confirmed that Arika had just enough funds to develop the game on their own. Since we're not involved with any other companies, we don't have to worry about contracts or approvals or anything else getting in the way, so when we need to make a change, we can just go ahead and tell people, look, we had to make a change. We're not worried about saving face or anything like that. This ties into Fighting EX Layer's more public style of development, one where Nishitani and friends weren't prevented from speaking directly to their player base when appropriate. Additionally, Arika viewed the title as an opportunity for them to re-engage with the fighting game market, albeit a completely different one. In the time between the release of EX3 on the PS2 and EX Layer on the PS4, a whole slew of new features had become commonplace in modern fighting games. The series has always had entertaining single and multiplayer content, but Arika now needed to figure out modern day netcode, balance patches, long-term content updates, etc., so they had quite a bit of work to pursue. With the goal of making this a reality, Arika began discussions with various publishers and investors to receive extra funding for new characters and features, and as the aforementioned Polygon article mentions, fans demanded that they reach out to Capcom to convert the game into a proper Street Fighter EX sequel. Interestingly, Nishitani himself actually commented on this request, stating that if the conversation between the two studios were to progress, there was a solid chance of this happening. I wonder how much of this was just marketing talk, but the underlying notion of such a classic series making a return on modern hardware was intoxicating. You have to remember that the Fighting Layer series continuation was pure lightning in a bottle. It literally popped up in our YouTube feeds one day out of the blue, making it somewhat of a miracle. The mainline Street Fighter titles, as well as its competition, naturally evolved with the advent of 7th and 8th generation consoles, but Arika never had the chance to do this with their fighting game output. For the genre's most hardcore fans, Fighting EX Layer represented a return to the glory days, a time when studios were taking chances on unconventional ideas by releasing them to market with full confidence. Arika could have stayed in their lane of licensed work and developed literally anything else with Unreal Engine 4, but they specifically chose to revisit their Fighting Layer universe. The Street Fighters might be AWOL, but fan favorites belonging to Arika make appearances, and they definitely make some strong impressions. Now that we understand Fighting EX Layer's history, let's figure out how its gameplay systems have been adapted to fit within the contemporary fighting game space. Much like its older brothers, Fighting EX Layer is a 6-button game, with 3 punches and kicks belonging to 3 strengths that make up your control scheme. New to the mix is a Magic Series system that allows you to freely chain normals together, much like in Marvel vs. Capcom or Darkstalkers. From here, you can combo into special moves or supers, and it leads to the title's combo system feeling noticeably free-form. Even when I first started playing, I didn't have any trouble pulling off some really big damage combos, and with how many types of attacks can be found, there's seemingly no limit to your offense. It's not just on the ground though, as juggles and air-to-airs play a large role in moment-to-moment gameplay, as you'll be leaving a lot of damage on the table if you fail to capitalize on them. Mid-range footsies, long-range zoning, and close-range grappling are all viable strategies in Fighting EX Layer, with its character roster being a deliberate harkening back to the older games. Let me tell you, when I first saw these classic fighters in a new art style on the character select screen, I couldn't stop myself from having a big dumb grin. The anime-inspired artwork is fantastic, as it does an excellent job of displaying personality. I don't think Doctrine Dark has slept in days, judging by his eye bags and dark circles. Certain characters have been fully redesigned, and while tampering with beloved fighters in a fighting game is a risky move, I feel that Arika nailed it. Sharon and Hayate have totally different appearances, but their new outfits bring a unique sense of style never before seen in the series. Kairi and Skullomania come to my mind as characters who look almost identical to their original concepts, so there's a satisfying blend of the classic and contemporary character designs in EX Layer. Once I began experimenting in training mode, it was like that scene in Ratatouille where the chef is taken back to his childhood, as everything I remembered about Street Fighter EX was here. I just about went crazy when I saw the throw animation, as it looks borderline identical to Street Fighter EX3. It was a huge nostalgia rush. Even some of the running animations look like they've been animated by a blind 7-year-old, but I mean that in the best possible way. Fighting EX Layer oozes with charm, and I could instantly tell that it's a love letter to those who enjoyed Arika's output from back in the day. Fighting games are no stranger to reused animations after all, and with Arika's lack of major funding, it's a no-brainer as to why Street Fighter EX3 animations are found all over this new game. So, the controls are tight and responsive, the characters all bring their own style to the table, and the combos are just as crazy as ever. Sounds good, right? Well, there's one new feature that tends to divide the fanbase, and you may have noticed it already. The Gogi system takes the form of 5 cards that are equipped to your fighter, activating when certain requirements are fulfilled. For example, if you do X amount of damage to the opponent, you'll get a damage buff, or if you take damage, you'll have access to a one-time burst. This certainly sounds pretty interesting, but I can't quite help but think that I've heard all of this before. Maybe in another fighting game? Yeah, Gogi is pretty much Street Fighter Cross Tekken's gem system, but unlike that game where you can say no thank you, Gogi is mandatory. There is no way to turn it off, so you're just gonna have to get used to it. There are 15 of these decks, and the basic idea is to select the one that you gel with the most. As far as I can tell, you can't mix and match between cards, but I actually like this, as it lowers the amount of decisions you have to make before battle. They come in all forms, with beginner decks being straightforward and easy to understand, whereas the more advanced decks will often incorporate RNG and the game's more complicated mechanics into their offerings. Because fighters will receive impactful buffs and debuffs during every single game, some players feel that Gogi intrudes on the core gameplay a bit too much. Personally, I see why this viewpoint is so prevalent, but at my skill level, I find that it doesn't make much of a difference. You still have to know core fighting game concepts and your character's properties in order to win, so it's not like Gogi will always carry new players to victory. There are knowledge checks that can be forced onto you if you aren't ready, but they're not that hard to adapt to with some time. Drivin teleporting towards me for an instant command grab nearly made me shit myself the first time I was hit by it, but I figured out that jumping out of the way when I saw the startup animation was the way to go. Outside of Gogi, there are no major universal mechanics that are forced onto players, meaning that fighting EX Layer is more about individual characters than universal systems. They all adhere to the core concepts of the battle system, sure, but their diverse move lists and animations make them feel distinct from one another. You'll never feel that Garuda plays like Arika, who plays like Pullum, who plays like Shadowgeist, and even with limited fundings, Arika did a masterful job of developing distinctive gameplay styles. Learning each fighter is like learning a whole new game, with this density being one of my favorite qualities of the title. There's always something new to apply to your strategy, and it's part of why I enjoy fighting EX Layer's battles so much. With the gameplay out of the way, let's see how much content fighting EX Layer has to offer, but before we cover the offline modes, I feel the need to discuss online first. If you don't know, the game unfortunately doesn't have rollback netcode, so despite having a full set of ranked, casual, and lobby matches, I rarely had any online battles that felt great to play. Entertaining character archetypes can't really be enjoyed when you're dealing with extremely laggy matches, and although you can search for players within your region, the player base isn't populated enough for this to be a reliable matchmaking method. As a result, I was often paired up with others all around the globe, and nearly every match I had was borderline unplayable. I'm sure we all hate it when our opponents rage quit, but I don't blame this Blair player, especially because I was playing as Drivin. Since the netcode doesn't lend itself to reaction-based strategies, all you need to do is forward jump, wait for their anti-air input to be eaten, and then mash out a command grab for ginormous damage. The best connection I had when pairing up with random players was 70 ms, and while this wasn't bad, there was still some noticeable input delay on my end. Waiting for a match against someone I hadn't played against before was unbearable, and I eventually just gave up after repeatedly being paired against the same player over and over and over again. At this point, I turned to casual matches, and after looking for a lobby battle with the most general search parameters, the game was unable to locate a room for me to join. I then created my own room, but after waiting here for what felt like hours, no one dared to enter my lobby of doom. Conversely, the netcode felt pretty good when I played against a friend in the same country, and none of the previous issues took place here. We were able to pull off whatever we wanted with minimal delay, so I'm pretty sure that this game is one that can work well within your region, but it will suck hard elsewhere. Look, I understand that Arika's finances couldn't ensure a smooth online experience, but I can't in good conscience recommend fighting EX Layer if you only care about online play. Moving over to offline content, things are much better, but still not perfect. Arcade mode is first up, and with its 3 difficulty levels, there are 7 fights for you to overcome. After defeating Garuda, you're treated to a stylish victory screen that contains your fighter's ending quote. There are no proper intros or outros, so if you want to know why these characters are actually fighting in the first place, then you'll be left in the dark. As a side note, I love how Alan proudly boasts about his love for the USA, but then he speaks Japanese. The irony is brilliant. If you're not a fan of repeating arcade mode runs, then expert mode might be up your alley, as it contains numerous combo trials. This mode is straight out of the Street Fighter EX games, and I was delighted to see it make a return in glorious HD. The get-up is simple: select a character and finish their combos in the shortest amount of time possible. As you progress, they quickly increase in difficulty, so I hope you memorize the name of each move, as it's impossible to switch to an input display. I haven't attempted every trial in the game yet, but I love the ones I did do, as I'm a sucker for any and all combo trial modes in pretty much any fighting game. Gogi mode lets you analyze your deck before battle, as well as refresh your memory as to what each card does. I love having the ability to quickly read up on the in-game encyclopedia and theorycraft new ways to effectively utilize the system before my next battle. Initially, I was just using aggro since it was the default choice, but after researching what each deck does, I decided to make use of Berserker going forward, and training mode is where I would put it to good use. Nice segue, huh? Getting to wail on the dummy and experiment with all sorts of training options was enjoyable, but it didn't keep me occupied for very long. I do appreciate the Gogi-related options that allow you to turn specific cards on and off, but overall, there's nothing here that I haven't seen before. It's your standard, run-of-the-mill training mode that can be found in any fighting game, but with Arika's budgetary concerns, I understand why this is the case. And that's all the content that Fighting EX Layer has to offer. I would have loved to see how the developers would have tackled Creator Fighter or Street Fighter EX3's partner arcade mode in this title, but they sadly don't make a return. This means that unless you're going to be grinding out matches with dedicated players on an offline setting, it's hard to figure out reasons to return to the game in the long run. Unless you're committed to arcade mode and combo trials, there's literally nothing else to do other than train against the training dummy. As mentioned before, the netcode isn't perfect, so if you dare to venture online, I hope you aren't expecting a good connection. The lack of meaningful content is my biggest criticism of Fighting EX Layer, as although its battle mechanics are more than solid, there aren't any unique ways to interact with them. It's a shame, because if there was a standout mode that supplied players with long-term offline replay value, my gripes with its content wouldn't be so severe. Here's where I would explain how a particular fighting game was received by both critics and fans, and then we would cap off by discussing what kind of legacy it left behind. But due to Fighting EX Layer being very niche, there aren't many resources for us to consult. The game has a 73 on Metacritic, but I only recognized 2 of the cited review outlets, and there weren't that many in general. With how often fighting game fans praise Street Fighter EX online, I'd have thought more publications would have covered this title, but oh well. Attempting to find reliable sales figures was also challenging, as I was unable to locate Arika's financial reports, although I stumbled across a Facebook post of theirs that mirrors what I said earlier about an open development. Arika publicly admitted to not having the capital to develop extra DLC, as well as prioritizing the game's PC port due to the arcade board running on the same operating system. They also state that a lack of crossplay was a result of financial issues, and I love how transparent they were here. I'm sure that we've all had the experience of reading new information about a fighting game only for the developers to say next to nothing meaningful, so Arika's honesty is a real breath of fresh air. To be real with you, my heart kind of breaks for them, as they just want to make players happy by developing fun games. On the bright side, the initial PS4 release reached expectations, with the studio claiming that they wanted to work even harder going forward. More details concerning minor game updates can be found in this post, but the overall message of not having the capacity to achieve your creative goals is something that I'm sure we can all relate to. In my years of covering fighting games on the channel, I don't think I've read anything that humanizes game developers to this extent. Now that I think about it, it's easy to take video games as a medium for granted and forget just how much money they can cost to produce, so it's a true marvel that Fighting EX Layer was even created in the first place. I'm sure that Arika made bank on Dr. Mario, so it's awesome that they put those funds into a new fighting game. Okay, jokes aside, things were looking bright for Fighting Layer's existing fanbase. They had gotten a new game with a conversational developer who was committed to expanding on the experience. Woohoo! When Nishitani said he was interested in collaborating with other studios, he wasn't lying, as SNK's Terry Bogard was added to the roster as DLC. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Bogard is the only DLC fighter, as the rest of the game's DLC on Steam are just mere cosmetics. Now at this point, you might assume that Fighting EX Layer just kind of came and went as quickly as it arrived, but you would be wrong. In early 2021, Fighting EX Layer Another Dash was announced for the Switch, and even though it appears to be a simple title update, there's more to it than meets the eye. Balance changes, new mechanics, and revised netcode are all part of the package, but there's just one little downside. It's a Switch exclusive. Yep, you can't play it on PS4 or PC, meaning that I don't have the facilities to test it out. Honestly, I have no clue why Arika decided to make a pseudo-sequel and then not make it accessible to the existing player base on the platforms they already own. That would be like if Capcom decided to release Super Street Fighter 6 as a Mac exclusive with no crossplay. I'm sure that some people would be happy, but the overwhelming response would be one of negativity. From what I understand, Another Dash removes the Gogi system entirely to make its gameplay loop feel like the original Street Fighter EX games, but with how it's, on the Switch, I can imagine that running streams and tournaments wouldn't be convenient. Hell, the console itself doesn't even have an Ethernet port, so I can imagine that online play would be spotty. In order to rectify this, Arika took to the stage at EVO Japan 2023 and introduced Fighting EX Layer version 3.0. As the name implies, this isn't a true sequel, but there weren't many gameplay details shown off at the event. Fans were provided with more information when Justin Wong uploaded a YouTube video of him playing the game after a trip to Arika's headquarters, as well as Arika themselves uploading raw gameplay footage. Air combos, sidesteps, and even a burst are some of the new mechanics thrown into the mix, but just like with Another Dash, there's yet another problem. And before you guess, no, it has nothing to do with the Switch. For some reason, and I don't know why, version 3.0 was never released. It's been over 2 years since its announcement, but we're still stuck with the older PC revision. Let me put that into perspective for you. Street Fighter 6, Tekken 8, City of the Wolves, Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection, and Mortal Kombat 1 have all released and received major content updates since version 3.0 was announced. If I had to guess, Arika's finances are probably rearing their ugly head and preventing the studio from getting the update out the door. Part of me believes that it's forever stuck in development hell, but I hope that it can be made public one day. It looks like a lot of fun. This brings us to a somewhat unfortunate end, as the game never truly received the player base it deserved. I totally understand that the Gogi system and delay-based netcode somewhat doomed the game from the beginning, but the first major update being stuck on the Switch and version 3.0 being vaporware isn't helping matters. At the end of the day, I like to look on the bright side of things, so it still blows me away that Fighting EX Layer is real. It seems like the type of game that fans would theoretically discuss on message boards as they know it'll never actually happen, but by some freak accident in the universe it ended up being released. Fighting tooth and nail through an ever-changing market and money problems, Arika pulled out all the stops for this game, and you can tell that the developers had so much fun while creating it. I think the game's bizarre nature is really charming, and with how Arika is staying afloat by working on more licensed titles, perhaps we could see a real continuation one day. I'm sure the fighting game community would love a brand new Street Fighter EX title, especially if the crazy dial is cranked up to 11 with its animations and sound design. For now though, you can easily pick up Fighting EX Layer for pretty cheap on PC, so if you can gather some friends to play it with and avoid exclusively sticking to single player mode, I would recommend it. Okay, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time and I hope you had fun. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.